So this research is on the recent resurgence in CD sales in the physical music industry by me, Will Copeland. So the importance of this topic, CD sales have been plummeting since around the early 2000s when it was in their peak, making hundreds of billions of dollars. And since then it has sort of been seen as a dead format, antiquated format. However, in 2021 the sales increased again, and for the first time in 2 decades. And then it was a slow dip sort of after that, but then it rose back up to $17.1 billion in sales in 2023, which was unexpected from the market at the time. And understanding more about this change is important for improving the understanding of the current state of the physical music industry, and it helps make predictions for the future of the physical music industry, which is especially important for small artists who aren't making all of their money from streaming, and they need this sort of information for ways to sell their music to their audience in better ways. So my personal connection to this, I have a extensive collection of physical music, both CDs and vinyl records, over 700 CDs and 1,000 vinyl records. So this is sort of developed into a passion for music as a whole and the physical music industry. So with this sort of passion and information I've gathered over time, it makes me develop a passion to understand my generation's perspective on this topic, on CDs specifically, and this is where my passion has led me over the past few years of collecting. So to start with my literature review, the first category was kind of the appeals of physical media and why people actually go towards physical media as it's moving towards a digital age. And for example, Lee et al. 2016 and Retromania both found that tangibility, a feeling of ownership, and nostalgia played major roles in people still buying physical media. Lee et al. Was a study mainly on physical games, video games, which isn't particularly compact discs, but it relates to this topic as physical media is often similar in the ways that people are appealed to them. And then Retromania was a book by a pop culture journalist in which he analyzed the nostalgia that people have towards their past. So next, the vinyl record resurgence. Ring in 2015 and Who's 2018 both added to this sort of information on the vinyl record resurgence, which was happening around the mid-2010s and is still going on now. Ring-In kind of analyzed the how young buyers were in the market, and it found that 72% of vinyl buyers during this resurgence were 35 and under. And then Who's 2018 kind of took it towards a more technical level, and they found that the vinyl record resurgence was especially common for producers because in the engineering of the vinyl record, they found that there's nuances that it brings out that compact discs or any other format of music aren't able to bring out. So when they're using vinyl records, it is important because they are able to find things in production that they wouldn't find elsewhere. And finally, the research on compact discs, while it is slimmer than the vinyl record resurgence and other topics, it is still present, especially around the mid-2000s when the CD was at its demise and people were trying to study why this was happening. For example, Straw 2009 studied why this was happening, and it sort of related it to the past and present of why this keeps happening with other formats. And what it found that the mediums of listening to music is constantly evolving, which is in correlation to the evolving music industry as a whole, that people are moving on from things constantly as things become more efficient. Additional research on compact disc is also more modern. For example, Rashidi 2020 found that a qualitative survey on 18 to 26-year-olds, and they found that their reasons for buying CDs were helping artists, convenience, and extra features. And this was especially important on the helping artists portion of this. So for the existing research, it was kind of in 4 main categories. It was the appeals of physical media, the vinyl record resurgence, the demise of the compact disc in the 2000s, and modern, more qualitative research. There was less quantitative that I found than qualitative on the reasons for buying compact discs, specifically in adults, 18 to 26-year-olds, which is important for this gap. So one of the main gaps I found was quantitative research focused on teenagers, and focusing on teenagers 14 to 18 around this high school range is very important because one of the key roles in the original appeals of physical media was nostalgia. And because CDs were in their peak in the late 90s and mid 2000s or early 2000s, these teenagers might not feel the same nostalgia that other people would feel. So there may be other underlying reasons for their buying of CDs. And then there was that gap in research on CDs, especially compared to the vinyl record resurgence. And there was a gap on studies of teenagers, which is what I focused on. So my research question, what are the habits and perceptions of teenagers with compact discs in 2024? My hypothesis was there will be a significant drop in CD usage in the modern era in relation with a negative perception of the relevance of CDs. So in order to go about this, I did a two-part survey. First, a Likert scale survey, which according to the Brown Iowa State University Extension is a very effective way to quantitatively analyze people's perceptions on behaviors and how they feel towards certain topics. And this could be applied towards the compact disc thing that I'm going on here. For example, a question could be the compact disc format was relevant during my childhood, and it could range from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then later those values given, the options given by the participant could be translated to numbers for later analyzation. And then the next part of the survey was the frequency survey, in which Conrad et al. Found that it's effective for finding the frequency people do certain things in a behavioral way. And one of the limitations, however, was that people often don't know the exact amount of times that they've done something. And the way that I went about this, because most people are not going to know how many times they've used a CD exactly in the past year, for example, I decided to give them a range so that they aren't forced to make an exact guess on what they did. So for my procedure, first I created this survey. It was about 8 questions. And then the survey was sent out to participants via email. And then after 141 responses were organized and graphed to make comparisons later on, and the conclusions were made based off of descriptive and visual statistics analysis. And according to the Purdue OWL, this was basically finding averages and analyzing circle graphs, for example, to find trends. And lastly, for the Likert scale and how I sort of moved it to quantitative values, I did it so the more negative was a lower number, so strongly disagree would have been a 1, and then it would have gone from 2, 3, 4 to strongly agree at a 5. And then I was able to take all the responses to find an average to see where it's sort of laid in the grand scheme of things. So for the ethical implications, the only personal question asked was the age of the participant. This was basically just to ensure that the people and the participants I was getting into this data were actually part of the data set that I was aiming to collect, and that people outside of it weren't somehow getting into the survey. And then emails and names were not collected, as I did not find it to be important, as I was analyzing a large data set and it did not seem necessary. And then prior to the survey, a clear written description of what happens with the data is provided. And in the results section, first my 4 findings that I mainly focused on here. 1, participants were more willing to buy CDs in order to support an artist. 2, CDs were scarcely used more than purchased in the last year. They were used significantly more than purchased, which I'll develop on momentarily. And then teenagers believe that CDs were more relevant during their childhood than they are now, significantly more relevant. And then 4, the discrepancy between CDs bought and people actually willing to buy CDs, which I'll develop on in a moment, but this basically means that people were reporting that CDs, they were willing to buy CDs from an artist they support, but this didn't show up when it actually showed how many CDs they were buying. So first, to start out, 2 of my questions in the Likert scale section of the survey was asking them about the current relevance of the compact disc, how they felt about it, and then comparing it to the childhood relevance of the compact disc. So for the current relevance of the compact disc, when you compare, when you combine the percentage of those who agreed or strongly disagreed, you find that 16.3% either agreed or strongly disagreed that CDs are currently relevant, and only 18.4% felt neutral. And for this, when you combine those who disagreed and strongly disagreed, a majority of 65.2% found that they did not feel that compact discs were currently relevant. And this led to an average of 2.33, which on that scale leads to more of an average of disagreement that CDs are currently relevant. And then for the figure 2, this was asking about how they felt about the childhood relevance of compact discs earlier on in their life. And when you combine those who agreed and strongly agreed, instead of 16.3% from previously, 39.7% agreed or strongly agreed that they were relevant during their childhood instead of now. 21.3% felt neutral, similar to before. And then there was a lower disagreement rate with 39% either disagreed or strongly disagreed that they are relevant during their childhood, with a mean of 2.97 compared to the 2.33 from before, about a 0.6 higher than the current. And then next, moving on towards the artist portion of this, the small artist. When you combine those to the first question was compact discs are an effective or good way for an artist to sell their music, and the participants reported that 29.1% either agreed or strongly agreed that it would be effective for artists to sell their music, 26.2% felt neutral, and 44.7% either disagreed or strongly disagreed that it would not be effective for artists to sell their music via CD. And the mean of this was a 2.79, which similar to before also leaned towards disagreement that artists selling their music via CD would be effective. And then I decided to sort of switch it up with the next question, asking I would buy a compact disc from an artist I support instead of just in general. And instead of a 29.1% agreement, there was a 50.3% agreement for either agreed or strongly agreed when you combine the two percentages. Only 17% felt neutral and 32.7% either disagreed or strongly disagreed. And this led to the highest average so far for this Likert scale survey section, in which it was a 3.32, or 3.23, sorry, which leans more towards agreement that people would be willing to buy a CD from an artist that they support. And then lastly for this data, I decided to ask for the frequency section how many times they used a compact disc specifically in the last year, and then how many times they purchased a disc and specifically in the last year, comparing the used versus purchased rate. And when you look at the amount of people that had used a compact disc in the last year, I decided to mainly compare those who had used it 0 times and more than 1 time because of how large the numbers were for 0 times. So for the people that had used a compact disc in the last year, 68.1% reported that they had not used a compact disc in the last year, while the remaining 31.9% used a CD 1 or more times in the last year. And the outlier where there was 8.5% with over 5 times. Instead of the 68.1% for 0 times from previously, with those who had purchased a compact disc in the last year, the amount of people that had not done this increased to 85.8% instead of that 68.1%. And with even lower outliers, with only 1.4% of people that had purchased more than 5 compact discs in the last year. So to discuss these findings, I'm going to start with my limitations here during this survey. So one of the main ones, this applies to many surveys, was survey fatigue, in which many AP research students were all setting their surveys out at once. So as these students were going through their survey, they may not have been giving the most accurate results, as for example, their teacher may have been forcing them to answer this survey, and they may not have given the most accurate responses due to that. And then second, the survey may have targeted or attracted people mainly interested in compact discs, and the main limitation of this is that it may have skewed my results, especially in that Likert scale section, in a positive direction, because someone coming across that title, someone who is not interested in compact discs, may be less likely to click on that, but someone more interested in compact discs would be more likely to click on that. So to go back to that effectiveness of artists selling CDs, comparing the effectiveness and the willingness to purchase again, people did not feel that it was very effective for artists to sell their music via CD with that 2.79 more disagreement rate. However, when you showed the amount of people that were stated that they were willing to buy a CD from artists they support, it was much more positive with 3.23, which based on past research makes me come to a possible conclusion that a loyal fan base may be the key to this effectiveness. This can go back to Rashidi 2020, in which it was studying why people actually bought CDs, and one of the reasons was for artists, supporting artists, so they could connect back to that. And then going back to the willing to buy CDs versus bought, so just for previously, the people willing to buy a CD from an artist they support was 3.23. However, a major discrepancy was found here. When people were reporting the number of CDs they'd actually bought in the last year, with that 85.8% saying 0 times, leads to a major discrepancy between people that state that they're willing to buy a CD and those that are actually buying CDs. So The reason for this, there are many possible reasons, but one of them could connect back to the research from Straw 2009, in which he was analyzing the demise of the CD and why it was actually going out of fashion. And one of the reasons was that there's just other more effective ways to consume music. However, it doesn't really explain the portion of why they were reporting in the first place, why they were willing to buy a CD and didn't buy one, which is an interesting topic there. And then comparing the people purchasing CDs versus using CDs, there was a major discrepancy. Around 17.7% more people had used a CD versus purchased a CD. And this can also connect back to the research I just stated, Straw 2009, as streaming became cheaper than CDs for some, and spending $15 on a CD, which is about the average price, and spending $10 a month on Spotify, for example, the numbers are, people don't want to spend that much, so that might be the reason for the purchasing versus usage rate. And then lastly, for this discussion portion, the childhood versus current relevance of compact discs, so comparing how they felt about the relevance of compact discs during their childhood versus now. These findings also strongly relate back to Straw 2009. In fact, it is supporting Straw 2009 in its findings, because when you see the relevance going down significantly throughout time, it shows the physical music industry evolving as people move on towards other formats, most likely streaming, and it sort of supports the findings there. But it also sort of connects back to the Rashidi 2020 again, in which you find that people are still buying CDs. It was a non-zero number of people still buying CDs and finding it relevant. So this could connect back to those reasons of why people are buying CDs, for the tangibility, nostalgia, etc. So for my conclusions, just to recap on my research question here, what were the habits and perception of teenagers with compact discs in 2024, which is when this survey took place. The findings that resulted from the survey that was put out during this research supports previous research in the field, but it also adds more questions to this research that could be answered based on the findings. This future research, lastly, is one: why are teenagers not buying CDs despite reporting that they would be willing to buy from artists they support? And while there are some possibilities, such as that Straw 2009, it didn't fully explain why they were reporting that they were willing to and not. It was kind of just explaining why they weren't, just at a blanket level. And then who is buying the CDs now? So when you look at the 14 to 18-year-olds that are likely not as affected by nostalgia, what demographic of 14 to 18-year-olds are buying this? And that could be answered with a more qualitative survey. And then the future of the CD market and manufacturing, especially for small artists, how is this industry going to grow economically, etc. And that's my sources.
Sure, thanks, Will.
Okay, how did you determine which results generated by your research method were most important in forming your new understanding?
Yeah, so when I was trying to find my findings and results, I basically found things that my four main points were things that it could be either supporting older research, as in it would add on to old research and support the findings there, or it was bringing new questions that were very interesting towards the table that could contribute to older research, and hopefully add to more questions that could be answered by future research. That's how I came up with my four findings.
What are the real world implications or consequences related to your findings?
Yeah, of course. So connecting back to the small artist thing, this is especially important there because many of these small artists aren't gaining as much traction from streaming. So when they need money elsewhere, it is very difficult. So they often sell their music via physical media or other donations, for example. And if they can find out more about how compact discs are fitting in with this current generation who is listening to a lot of music, then they can sort of make conclusions on whether they could benefit from that.
All right, and then if you could revisit your research process, what would you do differently and why?
Yeah, so when I was going through my findings, I noticed that I had a lot of questions that could be answered by a more qualitative sort of results in which there were a lot of numbers, however, deeper responses into why they did something or why this was happening could have been more effective, and that can be done by future research, but I think if I had done that, I might have been able to find deeper answers to these sort of topics that can't just be answered with numbers.